I don't like 3D animated movies, and this isn't coming from the place of a 2D purist. If anything, I think the impact of just how revolutionary fully CGI movies has been is grossly underrated. Of course, you can point to the visuals, bringing cartoons to life in a way never before thought possible thanks to 3D technology. But perhaps even more significant is the stories these movies told. Films like Toy Story and Shrek helped change how moviegoers began to view cartoons, not only as media for kids, but as vessels to tell heartfelt, hilarious, and impacting stories. The 1990s and 2000s were flooded with quality film after quality film, taking us to new worlds and imparting us with lessons and characters we'd forever cherish. But as the successes continued, I started to find these movies becoming formulaic. Despite each release seemingly making more money than the last, there was a calculatedness that grew more apparent in each one, content to coast on proven tropes, story beats, and recycled jokes as long as they were seeing big box office returns. And at that point, I checked out. I would hear of the occasional upcoming cartoon feature, but couldn't get past my own callous bias I had built up from watching uninspired movies go through the motions to view even the most acclaimed of these films. One movie I was always curious about, though, was 2010's How to Train Your Dragon. Judging from the trailers, it seemed to be the story of a boy and his cute pet dragon, so I assumed it was another goofy comedy about a kid trying to corral a silly, dog-like dragon. As popular as this movie was, I'd never really heard anything about it. There were no songs, none of the characters were iconic outside of people who had watched the movie, and yet, it spawned multiple sequels and TV shows, all with the same amount of fanfare as the first movie. So what is it about the movie that's made it so beloved to the point it's considered by many to be a modern classic? Is it a masterpiece that'll reignite my interest in 3D animated films? Or is it missing the things that make the best animated movies special and wind up as boring? The sky's the limit for this movie. Let's take a look at How to Train Your Dragon. The adventure begins on the island of Berk, where its Viking inhabitants are in the middle of being terrorized by a swarm of dragons. It's here we meet Hiccup, a young twig of a boy who runs through the burning city, doing his best to steer clear of the surrounding carnage. It's quite the action-packed start. Being thrust right in the middle of a war, it's exciting right from the jump. In his scrambling, he bumps into the head of the village, Stoic the Vast, a Viking renowned for his toughness, effortlessly able to defeat even the most vicious dragons. What stuck out to me during this whole opening was a comment Hiccup made about his town, that it had been there for generations, but all the houses were brand new. I waited for him to follow it up with a joke, because I knew if it was brought up, there had to be some sort of payoff. But no, the story continued, leaving me to wonder if I'd missed something there. Hiccup arrives at the blacksmith station, where he works as an apprentice to the head blacksmith Gobber, who's missing a few limbs due to dragon-related incidents. A dragon sets a nearby house ablaze, and Hiccup explains that's why the city is old, but the houses are new. That joke caught me completely off guard. It wasn't the punchline itself, which was funny, but the restraint they showed waiting to deliver it is what made it land so hard for me. The fact they felt confident enough in their comedic abilities to give such a long pause between the setup and the reveal is so impressive, and set a high comedic bar for the rest of the movie for me. I also want to take a brief moment here to give credit to the voice cast in this film. For as much that's made about celebrities performing on autopilot when it comes to voice acting roles, the entire cast here does a solid job in making these characters as enjoyable and, more crucially, believable to watch. Hiccup is voiced by Jay Baruchel, famous for his live-action work in She's Out of My League and This Is the End, and is supported by Gerard Butler from 300, who plays Stoic, and comedian Craig Ferguson as Gobber. The remainder of the cast is rounded out by the other youths of the island. Christopher Mintz-Plasse plays Fishlegs, Jonah Hill is Snoutlout, Kristen Wiig and TJ Miller act as twins Roughnut and Toughnut respectively, and America Ferrera is Astrid, the apple of Hiccup's eye. When I first saw them, they looked to be the same generic, smooth-skinned people that frequently inhabit these types of movies, but I also thought they were oddly shaped and sort of strange looking. My mind immediately going to The Croods, which ended up being on the right track since that film was also made by DreamWorks. The longer I watched, I did come to appreciate their unusual, slightly misshapen proportions and found their homeliness wound up helping them stand out against similar designs we've seen in the past. Hiccup goes over the various types of dragons that invade the island and how much respect each one would bring were he to kill one. The concept of Hiccup wanting to kill a dragon surprised me, that this would be the story's beginning conflict. It's perfectly sensible within the confines of the world, but the idea of a kids movie talking about our presumed protagonist wanting to kill something has the sense of plots from cartoons of yesteryear, not trying to tone down ideas for the sake of children, and I'm all for that. The crown jewel dragon is the monstrous nightmare, the most dangerous of the dragons due to its setting itself on fire during combat. Maybe this is something that's been done in other media, but personally, I've never seen it, and it's a spectacle to behold. One of the rare ideas that sounds good in theory, but winds up even better in execution. Hiccup desperately wants to kill a dragon to fit in with the other Vikings, but Gobber tells him in order to do so, he'll need to stop being all of this, he says while pointing to him. Determined to prove himself, Hiccup sneaks off to use his new net cannon to capture a dragon, and to his own astonishment, he hits the most dangerous and mysterious of the dragons, the Night Fury. He watches it crash in the distant mountains, but before he can claim his prize, a monstrous nightmare chases after him, destroying one of the city docks before the pursuit ends. We soon discover that Stoic is Hiccup's father, who's frustrated how disaster follows his son wherever he goes, and crushes him by saying no matter how much he talks about being a dragon killer, it's the one thing he's not. You can sense the disappointment of this admission on both sides. Hiccup wishes he were a bloodthirsty Viking, so he could fit in with the rest of society and to make his dad proud. And his father is at his wit's end trying to figure out how Hiccup is going to make it in the world if he can't even do something as basic as killing dragons. They both desperately want him to cosmically turn into a Viking, so they no longer have to worry about his place in the world. There's a sadness to them refusing to accept the fact he isn't like everyone else, and the decision they silently agree to, choosing to commit to this facade for as long as possible, rather than face the truth due to their uncertainty for what it could mean for Hiccup's life going forward, puts the audience in a place where you're not sure what lengths they'll go to maintain their status quo, thus giving a believable amount of leeway to any seemingly uncharacteristic actions they may later resort to. Gobber walks Hiccup home, doing a lousy job trying to reassure him his father loves him, saying,
"It's not so much what you look like, it's what's inside that he can't stand."
I was shocked at the number of cutting lines within this movie. Though I'll make you laugh, because they're not said with any malice or mean-spiritedness, but they're these subtle digs that could easily leave Hiccup with a complex for years to come. Stoic plots for the Vikings to search for and destroy the dragon's nest before winter arrives, and though it's dangerous, he says it's one of the occupational hazards of being a Viking, which gave me another laugh, courtesy of it being delivered as a casual passing comment instead of a joke where everyone stops and brings attention to it. Stoic struggles with how different Hiccup is, but Gobber makes the point that no matter what the future holds for him, he needs to be prepared. This movie is front-loaded with heavy conversations that introduce its themes for the rest of the film, but they don't weigh down the movie, and I think it's because of the concise way everything is presented. You won't find characters overcomplicating expressing their feelings or spending an unnecessary amount of time in any of these scenes, so you don't get too bogged down in emotion and can get right back into the excitement. Hiccup travels into the forest and finds the tied-up Night Fury, but when given the opportunity to kill it, he chooses to set it free, pinned by the beast, before it flies off. That night when he comes back home, his father agrees to his longtime request to take part in training to fight dragons. But when Hiccup tells him he can't kill dragons, his father refuses to listen, which may be one of the only changes to the story I'd make. Up until now, he's openly acknowledged Hiccup isn't the prototypical Viking, so I was taken aback when he abruptly put an end to the discussion. I know he was upset to hear his son move further away from what he wants him to be, but I still would have liked to have seen something along the lines of he gets angry, but understands Hiccup's reservations, and would resort to forcibly guilt-tripping Hiccup into going through with it anyway. And I think a shred of sympathy may have made the pain of failure sting a little bit more for both down the line. It ultimately wouldn't change the story or outcome, but might make the emotional arc a tad bit more consistent with the characters. The following day, the teenagers are placed in an enclosure to fight dragons for the first time, and watching their bravado quickly fade when finally face to face with these monsters is great, as is the education on each of the dragons. Things get hairy when Hiccup's carelessness almost gets the kids eaten, and Astrid angrily tells him they'll be inheriting the war with the dragons soon, and to figure out which side he's on. Which is a valid point. Nobody knows everything he's dealing with, but what they do see is his inattentiveness during these exercises, which could be enough to spell trouble for them if this were a real fight. Hiccup studies the Dragon Manual, which contains the written knowledge of all known dragons, but doesn't find anything on the Night Fury, so he treks to the lagoon where the beast lies in wait. During this, Stoic and the other Vikings sail into the fog to search for the dragon's nest, greeted by a startling jump scare of an enormous dragon silhouette. I did not expect that. Back at the lagoon, Hiccup brings fish to the dragon as a sort of peace offering, questioning its lack of teeth before extending them to eat its meal. In a sweet twist, the dragon, now known as Toothless, regurgitates half the fish and hilariously motions for Hiccup to consume it. Hiccup reluctantly takes a bite, and Toothless does his best to mimic the boy's smile in an awkwardly touching gesture. The two bond over Hiccup drawing a picture of Toothless in the sand, and Toothless tries to imitate the act with the tree trunk, putting all this effort in only to make an incomprehensible scribble, getting mad anytime Hiccup steps on his creation, which is the cutest thing ever, before the two briefly make physical contact. One of the primary reasons I had no desire to see this movie was due to my preconception of how they would handle Toothless's personality. So many movies take fearsome animals and turn them into goofy puppy dogs, playing fetch with giant objects, and other overtly dog-like behaviors. It's a long-standing trope that continues to get laughs, but I had no desire to see it played out in another movie, so I was thrilled to see this film avoid that cliche. Toothless is still animalistic, but also extremely intelligent, and both sides of his personality are depicted with such balance, it crafts him into a complex character, even though we've barely begun to get to know him. Realizing broken tail webbing is what's hindering Toothless from flying out of the lagoon, Hiccup begins to work on creating a device to help Toothless gain enough altitude to help him escape. What follows is an expertly constructed montage of him splitting time between bonding with Toothless, rigging together a saddle to try and ride him, and applying what he learns through their companionship to his dragon training, subduing them with understanding rather than violence, leaving his peers in stunned silence. It advances the story so effortlessly, illustrating their strengthening connection while also showing off his new skills with dragons. You know this double life can't last, but it's too enjoyable to ignore watching him succeed in the meantime. Nobody is happier to hear of Hiccup's progress than his father, whose trip to find the dragon's nest proved to be a massive bust. Meanwhile, Hiccup spends his afternoon flying on Toothless, and the shot of them diving towards the sea, my stomach dropped the same way it does when you descend on an actual roller coaster. He doesn't have the hang of it yet though, mistakenly steering them into rocks while consulting his flight cheat sheet, and Toothless returns the favor by smacking him in the face with his ear. It's a nuanced action you don't consciously register as being significant, but it demonstrates their comfort level with each other that they can interact in these ways. Things get dicey when they fly too high, and Hiccup falls off. There's a palpable rush of panic watching them freefall, but an equal level of reward watching them work together, let alone the fact Toothless cares enough to rescue Hiccup by following his lead. Toothless celebrates their successful flight by flying through a fireball he shoots out, singeing Hiccup. The universe certainly does an excellent job at humbling this kid. The two find a place to rest when a tiny group of dragons comes to scavenge their leftovers. With a little bit of food-related kindness, one of the dragons curls up and goes to sleep beside Hiccup. This wholesome experience confirms his suspicions that dragons aren't the bloodthirsty monsters they're believed to be, and with a modicum of kindness, perhaps they can coexist together. Stoic returns, greeted with news that Hiccup is excelling in his dragon training, and bestows a helmet made from Hiccup's mother's breastplate. It's bittersweet. It's a gift from his father for what should be a touching moment, but also, it's made from a weird part of her armor for him. Nothing can just be nice for Hiccup. There has to be a tinge of weirdness to every encounter, and nobody can see it but him, which makes it even better. The next day, Hiccup is selected as the top of the class, and given the honor of later being able to kill his first dragon, infuriating Astrid to where she follows him to Toothless, but is scared off by the dragon, with Hiccup sarcastically commenting,
We're dead.
Hiccup does his best to convince Astrid that Toothless isn't dangerous, and fed up with her abrasiveness, Toothless takes them on a rip-roaring flight, high in the sky and even down underwater, eventually scaring her into submission. Astrid comes around and enjoys the calm flight through incredibly realistic-looking clouds, transitioning from day to night and through the northern lights. And the orchestral song that plays is divine, the film's best, while bringing the two closer together. Their good times are put on hold when they find themselves flying in the middle of a pack of dragons. The entire scene is eerie, surrounded by a mist, with no clue where they're going or if they'll live long enough to find out. It turns out the dragons are taking their kills to an under-island cavern, forced to throw food into an abyss, which is home to an enormous dragon known as the Red Death. The Red Death is so massive, it'll feed on other dragons too, evidenced by trying to devour our heroes who narrowly escape. The two deliberate how to handle the situation, with Hiccup asking for the night to figure out how to address their new issue, and Astrid agrees with a kiss. It's a cute romance. Hiccup loved her from afar, but not in a way where he would do anything for her. They didn't have much prior history, he wasn't actively courting her. Things happened to fall into place, coming across as organic affection. The next day, Stoic addresses the village, saying how relieved he is to show his face around town now that Hiccup has proven himself to have the makings of a viable Viking warrior. It's another example of characters not being aware of how they're speaking about Hiccup and how their words affect him. The saddest part is, this jest is based in Stoic's own insecurities. He feels a certain level of public shame that the top Viking son doesn't live up to the bare minimum of what it is to be a Viking. And it goes deeper still, with him worrying how his son will survive once he's able to go out on his own if he can't sufficiently take care of himself. None of this is blatantly stated. The characters never have these soul-searching discussions with each other, but you have to read between the lines of what they say, and definitely warrants rewatches to dive further into the intricacies of their relationship. Even when Stoic proudly watches over Hiccup preparing to slay a dragon, he watches his son select an axe and mutters to himself that he would have chosen the hammer, showing even when Hiccup follows the path his father wants, he finds a flaw with what he's doing. Maybe because deep down, he knows his son isn't cut out to be the Viking he wants him to be. As Hiccup is about to show everyone his dragon taming technique, his father, possibly acting out his subconscious desire not to upset the status quo, startles the beast, which chases after Hiccup. Hiccup screams alert Toothless, who makes his way out of the lagoon and comes to the rescue, resulting in the two dragons facing off in an entertaining battle. The Vikings capture Toothless, and Stoic and Hiccup have a confrontation. Their discussion winds up with Hiccup revealing he's been to the dragon's nest, which consumes his father. Hiccup pleads for him not to go, begging for him to listen, and is delivered with such panged emotion, one part frustration and the other hurt. We may not see it, but you can feel a deep-rooted history of this sort of behavior occurring between them many times before. His father physically shrugs him off, which isn't the most violent act we've seen in an animated film, but seeing this kind of physicality committed against a child, let alone his son, it amazed me they were willing to go this far. And Hiccup's scared, lost expression still resonates with me. Stoic and the Vikings chain Toothless to one of their boats, forcing him to lead them to the dragon's nest, as Hiccup helplessly looks onward. Astrid poses the question to Hiccup why he didn't kill Toothless when he had the chance, and he has the epiphany he saw himself in Toothless, a frightened creature. But Astrid gives a boost to him, telling him he may not be the first to kill a dragon, but he was the first to train one. This inspires Hiccup to come up with a plan for the kids to rescue the Vikings by riding on dragons. The plan being so radical, Roughnut says,
"You're crazy. I like that."
Which got a good laugh from me. The Vikings arrive at the dragon's nest and make a huge mistake in blowing a hole in the mountainside, releasing the Red Death, and it immediately decimates their factions, setting the ships ablaze. I didn't think about it until the movie brought it to my attention, but Toothless was still chained on the ship, and I found myself worrying for his well-being, which I never would have expected from myself. As things go from bad to worse, the kids fly in, doing their best to fight off the behemoth, while Hiccup tries to free Toothless. They become submerged underwater, and though he tries his best, Hiccup passes out, left to be rescued by his father. Seeing Toothless roar during this ordeal, you get the impression he's telling Stoic to leave him there and rescue Hiccup, and it's a genuinely touching moment. In a heartwarming heel turn, Stoic jumps back in the water and frees Toothless, who grabs Hiccup, ready for the final fight. Before they can take off, Stoic apologizes to Hiccup, telling him he's proud to call him his son, and that he doesn't have to fight, and Hiccup responds that for Vikings, it's an occupational hazard. This back and forth perfectly wraps up the themes presented throughout the film, the father-son at odds relationship, and when Hiccup says him riding off into danger is an occupational hazard, it's him and his father coming to terms that he may not be conventional, but he is a full-fledged Viking. It's refreshingly simple how minimal everything here is. The amount of dialogue, it not being overdramatic, they don't force the conversation to wrap up plot lines. This should be a lesson for how to bring a movie to a close, and this is all before the final clash. They take to the skies, and the shot of the Red Death flying is incredible, and he looks massive when he's partially obscured by the clouds. It does a phenomenal job giving him a determinable size because it ends up making the dragon even more terrifying. They pepper the Red Death with Toothless's fireballs and dive bomb towards the earth, and it's a great plan. The dragon is far too big to deftly change course and crashes into the ground. And it's the funniest thing to see the dragon explode. It's not at all the reaction I would have expected to see when it crash landed. Their celebration is premature, however, when they get hit by the dragon's tail, knocking Hiccup off and falling into the fire. When the flames die down, all that's left is Toothless, with Hiccup nowhere to be seen, much to the despair of everyone. That is, until Toothless moves his wings and the boy is unconscious but alive, with humans and dragons celebrating. Sometime later, Hiccup wakes up at home with Toothless, now missing his left leg. It's a bold decision for the movie to go this route, but it works. Watching him deal with the shock and insecurity of his missing limb, and serving as a reminder of everything he's gone through, but it doesn't define who he is. Hiccup steps outside to see that Vikings and dragons are now living side by side in harmony, and his dad says they needed all of that. A great callback to how he was always seen as and felt inadequate, and now he's the shining example of a new era of Viking, and another kiss from Astrid certainly doesn't hurt. The movie ends with the kids hopping onto the dragons, flying into the wild blue yonder, ready to take on whatever comes next. How to Train Your Dragon is an interesting subject in the case of CGI movies. It didn't contain the usual hallmarks that the most popular 3D animated films possess. No major celebrity voice cast or wacky wisecracking sidekicks. And there was a noticeable lack of irresistibly cute characters and dance numbers set to original or Billboard chart-topping songs. Compared to these movies, How to Train Your Dragon is boring, choosing to concentrate on the absolute fundamentals of storytelling rather than the marketability of these kinds of films. On the surface, the concept is a village of Vikings is in constant war with dragons, but the story's focus actually has very little to do with physical dragons and everything to do with the dragons in our lives. Really, the movie is all about relationships. Hiccup trying to live up to the idea of what it means to be a dragon killer, constantly berated by those around him for not fitting in to what society's conventional idea of a Viking is. The lingering unease between father and son, hesitant to openly admit Hiccup isn't like everyone else, lest it cast his life into uncharted territories or risk ruining their already tenuous connection. But then there's the bond with Toothless, whose trust in each other brings the two closer together, giving Hiccup the confidence to rescue the Vikings his way, leading to a world where humans and dragons live together in harmony. With so much time spent on these conflicts, I realized there wasn't much action in this movie at all. There was the beginning raid scene and the ending scene with the Red Death, but the rest of the time was spent on Hiccup learning how to deal with these perceptions and expectations from himself and others in increasingly escalating circumstances. So the question, do I personally think How to Train Your Dragon is a cartoon classic? It's hard for me to put it on that level. For me, it doesn't quite reach the highs that the all-time animated films do. But also, there aren't any lows here either. I can see people, especially those who grew up with it as kids, listing it in their favorite movies, and you'll find no pushback from me there. Since 2010, there have been 2 additional, theatrically released, fully animated sequels, numerous animated TV shows, and a live-action remake. The fact that there's this much mainline content is proof of people's profound love for this universe, and since I've watched it, I've been feverishly wanting to see the adventure continue. How to Train Your Dragon is a flat-out great movie, telling a simpler story, but winds up being much more complex than other films despite this. If it does anything, it inspires me to know that there are people out there not only receptive, but craving gentler narratives, and that we don't need zany, off-the-wall misadventures. It makes me want to slowly reintegrate myself back into this world of 3D animation, especially if those movies are as boring as this one.